Hi, my name is Sabrina Bell, and this is my case study presentation on second language acquisition. Second language acquisition is a huge part of the education system in the United States. The school systems and other agencies like Department of Human Resources, Telephone Communication Services, and healthcare profession have translators and written documents to meet the needs of individuals who are classified as foreigners in this country because their culture and native language is not English. There was a time when people in power believed one language should be spoken in the United States, which was English. Unfortunately, this belief was not effective because the U.S. allows so many foreigners to come into this country for several reasons, like financial gain and cheap labor. According to Pascal and Burma, 2011, linguistic hospitality is a way to build a relationship between cultural language to welcome and recognize the speaker's identity. My case study interview was conducted with a native Spanish speaking woman, Mrs. C. Mrs. C came to the United States from Guanajuato, Mexico in 2003 when she was 9 years old. She and her three brothers attended elementary school in a class setting with 30 students who were English language learners. Even though her mother retained most of her Spanish native language, Mrs. C and her brothers developed a second language from repeated tasks or English word uses from her teacher. During our interview, I discovered Mrs. C was influenced to learn a second language due to exposure in her class environment, and she had the perseverance of a good attitude and motivation to learn a second language to gain the privileges that English language would offer. Schumann's acquisition theory says when a person is learning a new language, motivation and attitude helps with the process and the adaptation when acquiring a new language. Currently, Mrs. C has a job working with a predominantly Russian group of people. Her coworkers speak English, therefore she has not acquired a third language. She attends a Catholic church that is Spanish speaking with music, sermons, and scriptures. The clients her church provides outreach to are Filipino culture and their native language is Spanish. Spanish is a language that is spoken worldwide with close to 500 million speakers in the world. Some of the language was not original because other dialects were borrowed from other cultures, creating romantic and vulgar language, resulting in these two cultures speaking the same language due to a connection and similarities in dialect. In addition, 75% of the Spanish language are Latin roots. Therefore, the Spanish language is being retained in Mrs. C's church to satisfy individuals for Christian service. Mrs. C and I met for two interviews. The first interview was in a physical setting outside, and the second interview was completed via Zoom communications due to the rainy weather. In my first interview, I asked Mrs. C about her experience learning English and the effects of this new language towards her emotions. She expressed her anxieties, such as fear in a new environment, like attending a new school that had only one Spanish speaking staff, and she felt the drilling of new English words would be complicated to learn. Mrs. C learned English through repetition and assistance with her teacher through scaffolding. The scaffolding strategies were labeling the classroom with English and Spanish words, and English was predominantly spoken in the classroom. Mrs. C's writing was in a simple format with verbs, nouns, plural nouns, conjunctions, and prepositions. She capitalized the verb reign in her sentence, which was not the introduction portion of the sentence. In addition, she made an error with the use of a preposition in versus on to begin a sentence. I asked Mrs. C about the words bicycle and tricycle. In order for her to understand my question about the meaning of the two words, she shared the Spanish words bicicleta and triciclo for her background knowledge, which is a cognate knowledge, having some background knowledge about a word because it shares the same similarities in English and Spanish. I referred to the Solemn Teacher Observation Matrix to rate Mrs. C's proficiency in oral language. Her rating was fours in each area of comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. In comparison to the ELPS, TELPAS, I rated her speaking as intermediate to advanced because she could speak in short, simple sentences, asking questions to clearly complete an instructed task. Mrs. C understands questions if an English speaker talks slowly and she can connect her thoughts to a question using words in a syntax manner, forming sentence structures that are simple and complete. Her semantics and lexical for the English vocabulary and meaning of words relates to her cognitive knowledge. For example, when I asked her about the bicycle and the tricycle, she did not use a morphology technique to look at the parts of the words for meaning and context. She relied on the similarity the two words shared with the Spanish words bicicleta and triciclo. Mrs. C's interaction with the environment like work, neighbors, and daughter's school allows her to strengthen her English language. Although she does not understand all words in English the first time spoken, she develops understanding of the words if she hears the words often. Mrs. C is progressing well in her second language because she was a beginner learner at a young age. The early stages of learning a second language is critical because the way the brain develops in children. A child's brain goes through a pruning process where information is removed to store new information due to its plasticity, neuron synapse, causing the brain expansion. Being in the presence of a large group of students to learn a second language in elementary school was an advantage for Mrs. C because there was more physical interaction to increase better use of new language development with the use of a buddy system. She was able to model and have repetitive assistance for academic learning in English. Furthermore, Mrs. C's teacher used scaffolding according to her zone of proximity to master a task. Her teacher provided materials that were familiar to a 9-year old non English speaking student to grasp the English language, like books, flashcards, and setting a manageable goal for her age to learn a certain amount of words for the month. The social interactions between Mrs. C's peers and teacher allowed her to study signs and symbols for activities in class to make interpretations for semantic parts of language. As an adult, Mrs. C continues to use English with her microsocial and macrosocial systems. She utilizes her second language for family with translating in English for business or for mediation, which is her microsocial system. On the other hand, her macrosocial system, use of second language, is for environmental purposes like work, communicating with other cultures, and conditions that may refer to safety and protection in the community. As she continues to be in the presence of these use of language systems, Mrs. C can evaluate and develop new vocabulary and new descriptive words for grammar and speech and writing. Learning the meaning of new words will extend her linguistic development and provide opportunities to be more proficient in the English language. Finally, in order for Mrs. C to speak the English language as it relates to behavior is for precision and not for idioms and not for misunderstandable jokes. She will value the English language because there are some words she has previously heard in Spanish that relate to the English words. Also, speaking a second language will benefit her for social status in the United States, as well as her daughter's integration with the custom to education with her peers to increase her new language acquisition in academics.